Retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn is one of those advisors working for Donald Trump. He's the former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He served in Afghanistan. He's also the author of the brand new best-selling book, The Field of Fight, How We Can Win the Global War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies. General, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Wolf.
Have you spoken to Mr. Trump about his reaction to what the Khan family said?
I have not. I have not. And I mean, it's the sacrifice that the Khan family has given to our country by the loss of their son is something that you can't fathom, and you can't really address without being, like Mr. Khan says, empathetic to their loss. I do believe what we have, though, is we have a significant problem with radical Islamism, and we have to address this problem. And I think whatever Donald Trump says this afternoon, the bigger issue, and we're seeing it in our own attacks today in Libya to try to settle that situation down, what we've seen around Europe. I mean, the rise, the doubling, Wolf, of radical Islamist groups around the world is something that we have to pay greater attention to.
And you've written a whole book about it, and it's
right.
a bestseller. But if you had a chance to speak to Mr. Trump today, what would you say to him? What should he do as far as this family is concerned? Because our hearts clearly go out to this family. You know what it's like.
Sure,
you've had to speak with families who've lost a son or a daughter in combat. What should he say?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that Donald Trump has to be honest about his feelings about this family and about what has happened to them. And I mean, they've given the last true measure of devotion in the loss of their son. So, I'm not going to judge or state what Donald Trump has to say. What I personally believe is that we have to obviously, I do think that we have to show empathy to these types of people.
Should he call this family and speak to them and apologize to them?
I don't know. I mean, he'll decide to do whatever he wants to do. I do believe what we must do, though, is we must recognize that we are facing an incredible challenge around the world with this problem that we have. I mean, it wasn't Donald Trump that got
Captain Khan. He volunteered.
But it wasn't
for
Donald
service.
Trump that got us into the war. It was. I mean, there's all this noise today about Jeb Bush. I mean, the 2003 decision to take us into the Iraq War is a strategic. It will go down in the first half of this century as a strategic failure. President Bush.
President Bush did
for
that.
President Obama to pull us out of Iraq when he did, and we are now upwards of around 5,000 or 6,000 troops inside of Iraq again, and that number continues to climb. Like we've just seen the Secretary add more troops to it. So, Wolf, I mean, we have to come to grips with what we're facing, and I feel for the Khans. I'm saddened for their loss, but we also have to recognize the bigger issue, and I think that's what Donald Trump, I believe that's what he is continuing to harp on, and I think he ought to continue down the road to talk about the illegal immigration problem, the economic problems that we're having, and all these other issues that we're dealing with.
He's also, Mr. Khan said, what sacrifices have you made, referring to Donald Trump? And he said he's made sacrifices. He hasn't made any sacrifices like, God forbid, losing a son in combat.
Yeah. I served in Afghanistan not only with my brother at the same time, but with my son at the same time. So, I mean, I'm not going to question how people define sacrifice or service. Each one of us has to feel that in our own heart, how we serve this country in some capacity. So, I mean, I'm not going to second guess it. I just know that we have a major problem on our hands right now, and this administration, and frankly the last administration with some of its mistakes, this administration has made some serious errors.
John McCain, he said, and I read a little bit of it earlier.
I read his letter.
A very strong statement. He was a former, spent 6 years as a POW in Vietnam. He was in the U.S. Navy. I challenge the nominee to set the example for what our country can and should represent. While our party has bestowed upon him the nomination, it is not accompanied by unfettered license to defame those who are the best among us. I assume you agree with
I read his
Senator
letter.
McCain.
I actually thought it was a great note. I mean, I think it's a great note. I think we all have to continue to cherish the service and the sacrifice of the men and women who serve in our armed forces. It is the very best in the world, but I also add the caveat that they are not ready to fight our nation's wars right now, Wolf. So I thought his note was fine. I think that, the issue that's on the table is, and the bigger strategic issue, is what we are doing about this rise of radical Islamism around the world. I mean, it's killing thousands. Look what just happened in Afghanistan again today. Look what we are trying to do in Libya, a failed decision and a failed state, and we're dropping bombs. I mean, we need to start thinking about how do we invest in stability and not investing in conflict.
When John McCain was taken prisoner in Vietnam, he was a lieutenant commander, I think, in the Navy.
Right.
He was held prisoner for 6 years. He could have left earlier.
Unbelievable.
He didn't want to leave his men behind, as you know. And Donald Trump, he got a lot of controversy when he suggested John McCain was not a hero because he was a POW. When you heard him speak like that about John McCain, and you're a three-star general retired, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what John McCain went through, and it's been well documented. I mean, he went through some ungodly abuse by his captors, and so I'm not going to address that. That's well documented. I mean, again, everybody has to make a judgment call here. We are on a path in our country, Wolf, that is, at least from my perspective, and I think many others, is going in the wrong direction. And we have to get this country back on track to where we don't turn around in 4 years or 8 years or 10 years or by the middle of this century and we're suddenly a socialist
John
nation.
McCain received the Navy Commendation Medal, the Silver Star.
Yep.
Was he a hero?
I think heroism has to be defined by each individual and by the people that know you.
What do you think?
I mean, I would look at it and just say all people who serve in the military are heroes, as far as I'm concerned, just by the fact that they stand up, sign on that dotted line, and then they serve a Constitution and their buddies on their left and right. So I mean, I define heroism in a lot of different ways. I mean, we clearly have Medal of Honor awardees who are extraordinary heroes. But I would just say everybody sort of has their own.
But you don't think John McCain stands out as a hero, given the sacrifice, the service he gave his country?
Sure. I mean, I think he demonstrated a level of heroism by fighting back against the North Vietnamese who held him and brutally tortured him.
So you disagree with Donald Trump on this as well?
I disagree on a lot of things. What I would tell you is that we're getting wrapped around with issues that I don't think are the important issues of the day that the country should be worried about. And I think that we'll see what Donald Trump continues to offer. But I personally believe that he's tapped into issues that this country is challenged by, and it goes well beyond what we're talking about right now.
So the statements he's made about the Khan family and Captain Khan, statements he made earlier about Senator McCain, they haven't given you pause to reconsider your support for Donald Trump?
I think that the statements that have been made, and I think that the precision of them, I think the whole media needs to take a deep breath and go, okay, what exactly did he say, and listen to what he has said. And no, it hasn't caused me to go, oh, wait a second. I believe what I believe, and I believe that we have huge issues that we are dealing with in this country going forward. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I discount any of the feelings or the sadness that the Khan family has had to endure for more than a decade, 12 years.
You've served with several commanders-in-chief. Does he have the temperament to be commander-in-chief?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I mean, in terms of the decision-making ability, his strategic vision for the direction that this country needs to go, his ability to listen to advisors around him when we have these kinds of discussions. So, I don't have any issues with this. I mean, I'm more concerned about what we've seen Hillary Clinton do, Wolf, with basically the disclosure of highly sensitive classified information to our greatest adversaries. I mean, that's very clear. To say that she's more prepared to be commander-in-chief based on what she did. She's not even, shouldn't be authorized classified information.
Well, let me press you. When you say she gave classified information to our adversaries.
On a silver platter.
What's the evidence of that?
On a silver platter.
What's the evidence?
The evidence is what the director of the FBI has stated, okay? And what I know to be true, which is we are in an electronic cyber war with China, Russia, and Iran, North Korea, to name a couple others, but particularly China and Russia. For Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State to walk around with an unclassified communications device, multiple, putting that information on an unclassified server, you might as well be giving the Russians and the Chinese, a nice fillet on a silver platter, because they have the capability to intercept and to pull all that information in. So the likelihood, as the FBI director said, that they have that is very high.
But he also said there was no evidence her computer system, her server was hacked.
I'm not even sure the FBI has even been able to look at the whole thing, and, you know, because we're still looking for disclosed emails on her account that the numbers are 30,000. I mean, why is there such
Those were
a...
emails that she deleted because
Yeah,
she
why
said
did
they
she
were
delete
private
them?
emails.
No, she's a government employee. Why did she delete them? That server is actually belongs to the United States government, because that's what she decided to do her government business on. So it belongs to the U.S. government. So why did she do that?
Well, he didn't charge her. He said there was
I
no
know,
evidence for any crime.
and I disagreed with Director Comey. He should have just offered the facts, and then he should have preferred his judgment to the Attorney General and let the Attorney General make the decision. Because you've seen what the Attorney General's done. She's just basically thrown it back and said, well, you know, the director of the FBI said this, so I'm not going to do
Because
anything.
he was very blunt. He said no prosecutor, seeing the evidence there, would file criminal charges against her. You heard him say that.
I did. I listened to the whole thing, and I was stunned that the level of lying he said she did, and then she turns around just the other day and talks about not, you know, hey, the FBI director said I didn't lie. Yes, he did. He said you lied.
We're going to get into that too.
Yeah.
Retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Let me give you the name of the book, The Field of Fight,
Thank
How
you.
We Can Win the Global War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies. It's a New York Times bestseller.
Big time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, General Flynn, and thank you for your service as well.
Thanks. We'll
appreciate it very much.